with that, Zoe, I wanted to address what we here at Breakthrough News have been dealing with this week. We have spent the week here at Breakthrough reporting on the Trump administration's war on the left. So I want to say something very directly to everybody watching, because this show is now part of the story we've been covering.
Yeah, it is really no longer abstract for us.
No, it's not, because Breakthrough News, as many of you may have seen, has been subpoenaed by the Republican-run House Ways and Means Committee. They didn't send us a letter. They didn't send us like a polite request. They sent us a subpoena demanding our internal communications, our financial records, and a lot more, which is just wild.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important for us to be clear of what we're actually accused of, which is nothing. There's no crime, and we have not been charged with anything.
Yeah, that's certainly true. We haven't been charged with anything because there is no crime, right? We are a nonprofit newsroom. And as a nonprofit newsroom, we already comply with every tax rule, with every audit, every public reporting requirement we have already complied with. We haven't also taken a dime from any foreign government, as these people are trying to insinuate.
So, yeah, I guess the question is, what is the actual offense? Like, what did we even do?
That's a really good question, Zoe. What did we do? Because from my vantage point, what we did wrong in the eyes of these people who have subpoenaed us is we've covered the Palestine solidarity movement with staunch opposition to the genocide in Gaza. We have showed people what ICE is actually doing in the streets of America, which is something that these people are very upset about. We've reported on Washington's crimes around the world, from Cuba to the Congo to Iran to here in Lebanon, where I'm speaking to you from. That's it. That's what we've done. That's the whole indictment. That's our big crime, which actually is not a crime, Zoe.
Right. I mean, it is literally journalism. That is literally just us doing our jobs and doing journalism. I don't really know what else to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the journalism, the kind of journalism that these people would like to shut down. And that's the strategy here. I mean, they know that our budget at Breakthrough News is like literally microscopic compared to the billionaire-funded networks that literally run the airwaves. Like, they don't even need to win here or prove we did anything wrong. I think this is really just about trying to bury us in legal proceedings until we basically like run out of money or just stop reporting out of intimidation, which is also a part of the tactic here.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what people kind of need to understand, is that this is a playbook that they deploy. And again, they target us because of what we've been covering, but also because we're small. And it really sends a message to every independent media outlet that this could be you next if you don't fall in line, which is basically shut up and don't do your job.
No, that's exactly right. It sends a message. Like, this is, I think people really need to recognize this is not just an attack on little old Breakthrough News. Like, this is an attack on all independent media and literally freedom of the press itself. And it's ironic, Zoe, because it's coming from the same politicians who ran on, defending free speech, mostly from like the woke left. But right now, actually what they're doing is they're attacking free speech that they don't like.
Yeah. And I think probably our viewers are wondering, what can people do to help, to join us in this, and as we are facing really an unprecedented attack?
Well, first of all, I want to say there's been an outpouring of support from people who are outraged, as they should be, by this very unconstitutional attack on journalism. But there are two very concrete things that you can do right now. If you are outraged about this, and if you do support Breakthrough News and support independent media, first, go sign the petition. You can find it at our website, breakthroughnews.org. This petition is telling the Ways and Means Committee to stop muzzling the press and to drop this investigation, this witch hunt against Breakthrough News. And the second very concrete thing that you can do is you can donate. We've retained legal counsel, and we are absolutely going to fight this. But fighting costs money, and our funding comes from viewers, not from billionaires, and certainly not from foreign states. It comes from you. So go to breakthroughnews.org, sign the petition, and go find the donation link there and donate so you can help us push back again against this attack on independent media and on press freedom.
And people should know, all of those friends and foes who are watching, we are not going to be quiet. We're not going to stop doing the journalism that we've been doing, that has defined us, that has grown us this audience that we have today, because we know that's the journalism that's needed. We know that's the journalism that's actually needed in a moment where freedom of the press is under attack.
And like Zoe said, I just want to reiterate, we are absolutely not going to stay quiet. We are not going anywhere. The only rights we have are the ones we are willing to defend. So again, all the links will be in the description. Make sure you sign, share, and donate. The future of independent media actually depends on it. And with that said, Zoe, we're actually going to continue to talk about this escalating war on the left domestically in the US. So the Trump administration, as I mentioned earlier, has spent this past week making something very clear. It wants to criminalize the American left. An anti-communism summit where Stephen Miller called on leftists enemies of civilization, a 100-page State Department report branding activists, journalists, and even sitting mayors as agents of Cuba. Congressional Republicans going after independent media outlets, including this one, which, as I mentioned, has just been subpoenaed. Marco Rubio promising more terrorist designations to come for the far left. So if this feels familiar, it's because it is. The US has done this before. The Palmer raids, McCarthyism, COINTELPRO. Every time a movement for a more just world starts to gain real traction, the state reaches for the same playbook. Call them foreign agents, call them terrorists, and try to frighten everyone else into silence. So what is this moment really? Where does it sit in the long history of American repression? And how do we not just survive it, but organize through it and hopefully come out stronger? Our guest today has spent most of his life doing exactly that kind of organizing. Brian Becker is national coordinator of Answer Coalition and host of the Socialist Program right here at Breakthrough News, which means he's not just an analyst of this crackdown, he's one of its targets. Brian, welcome to Breakthrough Live.
Great to be here. How are you guys?
Well, we're doing okay, Brian. We're doing okay under the current circumstances, and we're really happy to have you on. I actually did a 2-part series with you a few years ago on my show, Dispatches, where we discussed the long history of repression against the left inside the United States. And I encourage people to go search that on YouTube because it's really worth the watch for understanding history. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that today with the time that we have. But first, Brian, let's start with your gut reaction here because, like I mentioned in the introduction, in the span of just a week, we got that anti-communism summit, we got the Miller and Rubio rhetoric about far-left terrorists, and then the 100-page Cuba report that reads like a government blacklist. As someone who's organized on the left for decades, how do you read this particular escalation? Do you think a genuine turning point or perhaps an intensification of something that never really went away?
Obviously, there's a big continuity for anti-communist witch hunting, anti-socialist witch hunting. I've been fond of saying that when the United States didn't have an official religion, it had the unofficial religion of anti-communism, especially starting in 1946 with the beginning of the Cold War, because it was an article of faith. If you were a socialist, if you were a communist, if you were a Marxist, you were obviously evil, you were going to be demonized, you were going to be criminalized. And that really impacted big parts of the American popular opinion. Certainly, it didn't stop the civil rights movement from prevailing. It didn't stop the anti-war movement from ending the war in Vietnam. Yet it did have a tremendous impact where people were basically afraid to identify as socialists. So there is continuity. But I think, based on your question, Rania, what is really going on here? There's 2 or 3 threads. And then before we get into the history, One thread is the continuity of anti-communism. It's kind of like in the DNA of American bourgeois capitalist politics. Demonize your enemy, call them a communist, and that's the end of the story. But there's another element which I think we should really emphasize here, which is the Republican Party, the MAGA project, Project 2025, the Trump White House is failing. You know, the Iran war is a disaster. It's obviously a disaster for the Iranian people who have suffered so much. But, you know, the American people have turned against it. Hegseth announced yesterday $37 billion has been spent since February 28th. Here at a time when half the country can't make ends meet, $37 billion for a war against Iran that, one, will not be won. It will not succeed. Secondly, it's a terrorist action. I mean, the U.S. government officials talk about terrorism. If Iran had dropped a missile on an elementary school in the United States, which the United States did to Iran on February 28th, the first day of the war, killing 120 school kids, we would call that terrorism. You know, it's done all of these things, but it is not succeeding. The population in the United States has turned against it. Look at what Trump has done with the ICE raids. Mass opposition to the Trump's domestic policies. You had the January 23rd general strike in Minneapolis, the January 30th national shutdown right now in Houston, mass mobilizations against the recent ICE murder. Today, the price of a barrel of oil as a consequence of Trump's policies in the Middle East has gone over $100 a barrel, meaning working class people can't afford to fill their tanks. So the anti-communism is partly a weapon of distraction. It's partly just trying to get people to turn away from the experiences that they know are true, which is the Trump administration's policies have been a disaster for them, and to think that there's some foreign agent that's causing the problems in America. And I think that will undoubtedly fail. So there is continuity with anti-communism, and I want to talk about some of that in the history. But we should recognize Trump is failing. Marco Rubio is failing. Pete Hegseth is failing. They want us to think about something else. They want to blame Cuba. They say Cuba is the 21st century communist threat. Well, why? Cuba is a country of 10 million people. What about China? China's a communist-led government. It's got 1.4 billion people. The population of Cuba is 0.7% as large as China. Why focus on Cuba? At the very moment that the United States is trying to, starve and deny the Cuban people the right to live. I mean, why? Because Cuba is close to the United States, and the Trump administration can say all these people who want to end the blockade in Cuba are nothing but these evil communists who are generated for or directed by the Cuban government, when in fact people of all walks of life, politically, everybody to the left of Mussolini is against this blockade in Cuba. And so the Trump administration wants to demonize them and criminalize them and stop the support that's growing in the country for Cuba. I think this witch hunt is going to fail. I think people in the United States are kind of hip to it right now. I don't think it's just the radical left, the anti-capitalist left, which is very big and growing. According to a recent Cato Institute survey, 62% of all young people between the age of 18 and 29 look favorably upon socialism, in spite of anti-communism being the unofficial religion of the United States. So I don't think it's going to fail, but we do have to fight back. And I do urge everyone who's listening to Breakthrough to take it seriously. The House Ways and Means Committee, the Trump administration, using this idea that everybody is a foreign agent or perpetrating terrorism, they're trying to shut Breakthrough down. They want to shut down independent media. They want to shut down anti-war groups. They want to do this. They're serious about it, but we can beat them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And now, Brian, we wanted to dig into a little bit of this historical context. You've lived this history and you've studied this history. So wondering if you can kind of put this in perspective for us, the Palmer raids, the McCarthy era, COINTELPRO. What is the pattern that connects them, of course, beyond the anti-communist overtones? And what specifically does this moment kind of resonate with? I'm curious where you think this analogy kind of holds and where it breaks down, because it seemed that the old Red Scares were more about a state that was powerful and confident, Does this one feel a little different? It seems that the Trump administration, as you outlined, is not in its strongest moment.
No, it's very different, but it's important to review the history. And again, even though I think we can win, I don't think we should assume anything, because it's really up to all of us, the millions of us who care about democracy, to stand together and fight back. But anyway, I did not live through the Palmer raids. I want to make it clear to both of you, because that was somebody said, "Oh, you're going to break through. You have a history of living through witch hunts like the Palmer raids," and I was like, "No, I did not live through the Palmer raids." Okay, that
He's
was
young,
1980.
guys.
Brian Becker exposed as being 120 years old. How old would you?
It's amazing. How do I look?
Honestly,
what's
incredible.
What's your skincare routine is my next question.
Okay, next show for that. So the Palmer raids,
Next show.
that was right after the Russian Revolution, 1918. There was a very enthusiastic, burgeoning socialist movement in the United States, all over Europe. And Palmer, who was the Attorney General, carried out what were called the Palmer raids, along with J. Edgar Hoover, who was then a young man just taking over the FBI. They deported 5,000 leftists because they were leftists. They were deported not because of what they did, but because of what they thought. They were deported because they had committed thought crimes. Many of them were socialists or anarchists or Marxists, but it was in response to this growing wave of radicalism following the Russian Revolution. The next witch hunt, which comes right after World War II, is also in response to a growing tide of revolution in Asia, the Chinese Revolution, the Korean Revolution, the Vietnamese Revolution, the revolutionary processes in India and Indonesia, in Iraq, in Egypt, all over Africa. All of the people in what was then called the Third World, or we call the Global South, were rising up against colonialism. And so there was a terrible witch hunt against all of the people in the United States, and particularly the Communist Party, but many others too, who were in solidarity with the national anti-colonial movements of that time. There were a wave of what were called Smith Act trials starting in 1949. They were directed mainly against the Communist Party. 144 leaders and branch organizers or chapter organizers of the CP were indicted and put on trial. They were put on trial in New York, in St. Louis, in Denver, in Boston, in Los Angeles, about 15 different cities in the United States between 1949 and 1958. Thousands of people went either to prison or fled the country. They lost their jobs. There was the Hollywood blacklist, the Hollywood 10, Dalton Trumbo, and others, directors, actors, screenwriters. They were all basically put on trial. They went to prison. Again, not because of what they did, but because of what they thought. And the government put on trial here in New York City Ben Davis, the first African-American city councilman elected in New York. He was also a communist, a Marxist, a socialist. They put him on trial, and he was sentenced to prison too in 1949 while he was a member of the city council. And the crime was that he was advocating, they said the Communist Party advocates the violent overthrow of the government. That was what the Smith Act trials were all about. And the Communist Party members, including Ben Davis, said, we don't advocate violence. We are for the peaceful transition to socialism. We don't believe in a violent overthrow. And they had no evidence that they did. So the prosecutor, in the last part of the trial, it was a 10-month-long trial here down on Foley Square, he read a part of the Communist Manifesto where Marx, writing in 1848, said that there should be a forcible overthrow of bourgeois society. And the prosecutor said, well, you read the Communist Manifesto, you study it, so you are guilty. And the jury found them guilty, and they went to prison for many, many years. Gus Hall, who was later the leader of the CP, I think was in prison for 12 years. Henry Winston, African-American leader, went blind in prison. He served 8 years in prison. Then there's another wave of witch hunts, which is called COINTELPRO, and that is my generation, not the Palmer raids. That was the late 60s, early 70s. We didn't know it was called COINTELPRO until the 1976 church hearings, but this impacted all of us. My apartment was raided multiple times. Our offices were raided. We were stopped. Grand juries were convened against us. In addition, all kinds of dirty tricks so that different parts of the movement were hating on each other, except it turned out it was actually FBI agents fomenting divisions within and among progressive forces. The Black Panther Party, 28 leaders of the Black Panther Party were assassinated, killed. These were young leaders of the Black Liberation Movement in the late 60s. That's COINTELPRO. So that was a third wave. And now we have this new wave. And I think, unlike the other three waves, it's generated for different reasons. Again, I think it's a weapon of mass distraction. There is no rising tide of revolution in the third world right now or the global south. It's really a gratuitous effort by a failing administration to blame progressive people, not just on their own unpopularity now, but the thing that they hate most. The thing that Project 2025 and MAGA and Trump have targeted all along is the advancements of democracy in the United States as a consequence of the civil rights movement, the civil rights revolution, which was not just for Black Americans, it was for Latino Americans, Asian Americans, Arab Americans, women, the LGBTQ community, disabled people, people who cared about the environment. This expansion of democracy is what these retrograde, right-wing, semi-fascist or completely fascist elements in the Trump administration want to roll back. So they're targeting us. They're targeting Breakthrough News. They're targeting many, many groups on the left, not because they're about to be toppled, not because there's a wave of revolution sweeping the world, as was the case between 1946 and 1950. It's because they want to take back America. They want to make America, quote, great again, which means to get rid of civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, all of the rest. And I think in this, they will fail, and they are failing. So now they're going to try to get people to hate and fear the left and say we're left-wing communists or left-wing terrorists. It's a new category. Gregory Logarfo, who was the ambassador, State Department ambassador on terrorism, said there's three kinds. This was this week. There's three kinds of terrorism. There's narco-terrorism, Islamic terrorism, and now far-left terrorism. And who are the far-left terrorists? Anybody the Trump administration doesn't agree with. Meanwhile, the real terrorists in the world, like the people who are bombing school kids and killing them in Iran, or the Israeli regime, which is terrorizing and has terrorized the people of Gaza with the genocide, they're never mentioned as terrorists. They are somehow like law-abiding, non-terrorist entities when they are, in fact, of course, the greatest terrorists in the world today. That's a chant, but it's not rhetoric.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely wild when you put it in historical context to see how they kind of just recycle things, but for the time. And I agree that their agenda is just so incredibly unpopular. But like me and Zoe mentioned before we brought you on, Brian, this is not something abstract for us because the House Ways and Means Committee, which is led by Republicans, has now issued Breakthrough News a subpoena demanding our internal communications and our financial records and a whole load of other things. And this, of course, follows years of Republican lawmakers pushing the lie that our reporting is part of some foreign plot. And we haven't been charged with any crime because we haven't committed one. We are, after all, a nonprofit newsroom that complies with every tax and audit requirement. And we've never taken money from a foreign government. Our only offense seems to be, covering the Palestine solidarity movement, covering ICE's terror in the streets, and covering, like I mentioned earlier, Washington's crimes around the world because it's an empire. Now, Brian, you host the Socialist Program on this platform. So this is an attack on you as well. What is it like to be on the receiving end of this? And talk about the mechanics, because they don't necessarily need to prove anything, do they? Like, isn't the process of going after us this way itself part of the punishment?
Yeah, the process is the punishment. And by the way, Rania and Zoe, I mean, this is just one part of a larger mosaic of right-wing and pro-Zionist attacks against the movement. I've been also recently the target of a right-wing Zionist pro-Israeli lawsuit, completely frivolous, completely, without merit. It's a slap lawsuit. It's a lawsuit designed to make the target of the lawsuit myself and many other people, in this case in Washington, D.C., we've just been through a whole year or more of legal processes. It's completely without merit, but it doesn't matter because you have to get a lawyer. You have to go through you have to spend the money, the time, the energy, the resources to defend against a completely meritless lawsuit in this case. And then when we win in court, if the charges or if the case gets dismissed because it's meritless, they will appeal because AIPAC and the other pro-Israeli entities that want to fund these kind of attacks against people who are standing with the Palestinian people, they'll appeal. And they can fund the appeal because they have lots of money to make the appeal. So the process is the punishment. So Breakthrough is going to fight, undoubtedly, it's going to fight against this effort by the House Ways and Means Committee, another meritless effort. But again, it takes time, energy, resources. You have to worry about your defense and prepare for your defense as opposed to doing other things like reporting on the news. And that's why people actually have to come to the defense of Breakthrough right now. People need to make donations and make significant donations, and significant is depending on your means. If you're making minimum wage, $10 is significant, but if you have a lot more, you should give a lot more. There should be a certain equality of sacrifice. It should not be simply on the Breakthrough staff to fight this thing. And I think hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people will come to the defense of Breakthrough, but each and every one of us has to do what we need to do. We have to make our own commitment. We have to take responsibility. So I've been targeted here, and I've targeted in other cases like the lawsuit I mentioned. But, what we're facing is, while significant, very minor compared to what the people who are being targeted by the Pentagon and the CIA, especially overseas, are facing every day.
Mhm.
So when you think about, and this is the way I think activists should think about it, I'm not going to focus on myself as an individual. I want to focus on defending Breakthrough. I want to defend the other organizations that are being targeted in this Cuba report. But we especially want to do this because we're in solidarity with the people who are completely being victimized, terrorized, and in many cases destroyed by U.S. imperialism. That would include the Palestinians. That would include the Iranian civilians who have been targeted. That would include the people in Cuba who right now are probably in a blackout, whose surgeries are being disrupted because the U.S. government, the same witch hunting Trump administration, which says that all of us are like agents of Cuba because we oppose the blockade. Right now, those Cuban patients in surgeries are having to stop the surgery because the lights are going off. I mean, we have to understand the real gravity. This is a criminal government. The U.S. government is a criminal government. U.S. capitalism is a form of organized crime. And they always say that their targets are the perpetrators of evil. Their targets are the terrorists. They're the good guys defending democracy. Meanwhile, it's a small clique of billionaires who are inflicting so much damage on the people of the world. So when you're helping Breakthrough today, which I hope you do, to sign the petition, make a donation, it's not just about Breakthrough. It's to tell the truth about the Palestinians, to tell the truth about what's happening in Cuba, to tell the truth about all of those people who are the victims of U.S. imperialism. And I really think we have to think about this as the fight of our life, not to minimize it, and certainly not to be intimidated about it, but instead to say, look, we're going to fight together and we're going to win together, and we can. The tide of public opinion has turned against Trump, as I said in the beginning. But if it's a passive opposition, it won't mean much. It has to be active. It has to have a militant fight back spirit. And I think that's what all of us can embrace right now.
That's exactly right, Brian. And I think it's so important that you did bring it back to really kind of like what the Trump administration is trying to distract from, which is its crimes abroad, but also its growing unpopularity at home. And you did mention the Cato Institute poll, just showing the real popularity of socialism as an idea. But we also know that socialist proposals and ideas like Medicare for all, taxing the rich, reining in the war machine, ending the war in Iran, ending U.S. support for Israel. All of these things are actually wildly popular, and poll after poll show that a majority of people in the United States actually support this. And this has been proven at the polls, even with the victories of candidates of the Democratic Socialists of America. Zohran Mamdani is the mayor of New York, and while he recently said that he did not have the legal jurisdiction to arrest Netanyahu, he made a video calling Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, a war criminal. So, this is just to say that these ideas are actually wildly popular, and they're no longer seen as political suicide. They're actually seen as politically important to mention, to actually gain progressive support. So, is that what this witch hunt about? Is it a reaction to the popularity of the ideas, and while the ruling class is having such an unpopular agenda on all fronts?
I think so. I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, Project 2025 started off as an effort to roll back the civil rights revolution in America. That was the real goal, to make America great, make it like an openly white supremacist regime again. Then mass resistance started. But the other element I think is very important is the Palestine solidarity movement.
Mm-hmm.
When, the Gaza genocide started, which started immediately after October 7th, a new day arrived, because unlike all of the past aggressions by the Israeli regime, this time the majority sentiment in the United States, and of course around the world, but especially in the United States, where it was most noteworthy because it was such a profound change, it turned against the US government and its support for Israel, and it turned against the Israeli government, and that is never going back. That's why Mamdani won, I believe. Mamdani won, there's several reasons, but the pro-Palestine sentiment in the United States, which he was identified with, made it possible for someone who declared himself a democratic socialist to win the mayoral race here in the center of world capitalism. And even though Mamdani is not a revolutionary socialist, he's not calling for a new mode of production, the fact that he won against all of the establishment forces that tried to crush him, I think it was largely because of the Palestine movement. But how did the Palestine movement become so popular suddenly? It didn't just happen by itself. There were people and organizations working day in and day out every day to make that happen. There were media outlets like Breakthrough News, but many, many other independent media that were giving voice to the Palestinian people, that were highlighting the massacre. Public opinion in this day and age actually does matter. It doesn't necessarily matter immediately, but it does matter. And it becomes a restraint on imperialism. It threatens imperialist stability. It makes real change possible. Without public opinion changing, if it's just small groups of people, nothing changes. It really requires millions of people thinking differently. This happened, one, because people could watch the genocide in real time, but two, because there was an organized mass movement asking people to come to the streets. And then there was an organized independent left media that covered it, like Breakthrough News. That's what the Trump administration wants to crush right now. They want to stop the organizers from organizing, and they want to stop the media, the independent media, from telling the truth. They only want to have this corporate, sanitized BS version of the news so that the American people and people around the world don't learn the truth. People are suckers for the truth. When you give them the truth, they get angry about what's happening. They get mobilized about what's happening. We need media and we need organizations. They are trying to shut both of those things down. And I think we can beat them. I think the tide is actually on our side. The majority sentiment is on our side. Even the people who are not yet socialists, and so many millions are or think they are, even with all of that, I think that we can win. The one thing we have to avoid is hand-wringing, getting scared, getting intimidated, running for the hills. I hate when liberals tell me, oh, I got to move out of the country because, it's so bad with Trump or whatever. No, Trump can be defeated. The right wing can be defeated. And by Trump and the right wing, I include big sections of the Democratic Party establishment as well, just so no one's confused. But we can actually win this fight because public opinion is on our side. Imperialism is a system in crisis. The only reason that they can actually maintain their control, it's not just because they have 900,000 uniformed police, which is a lot. It would be the single biggest employer in the country if it was all under one big police force. But it's really about public opinion. It's really, do they have millions of people who still go along with the system because they're confused by the system? Do they believe enough of the lies of the system? And that's why I think the most important thing is actually the media, the progressive media and the progressive organizations. Because if we can turn the tide, if we can win the battle of ideas, we can win.
No, I think that's really, really well said. And I just want to emphasize what you're saying here is, the whole point of a Red Scare like this is really intimidation. It's designed to make ordinary people afraid to organize, afraid to protest, afraid to even say what they think, right? And I think people watching right now, maybe watching what's been happening since this administration took over, especially like since the last week of escalation against the left, might be feeling that might be feeling that fear, especially, as we see the opposition party, the Democrats, have really stayed silent for the most part in the face of this assault. Even as the Trump administration brands them as the radical left too, like they don't really see a difference. So I appreciate your message to people who, might feel afraid right now. It's really important to have courage and to stand up against this. And I just want to reiterate that, before we go here, for anyone watching who wants to do something concrete right now, that's actually quite easy. You can go to breakthenews.org and find our statement about this attack by Congress on our outlet and sign the petition directly on the page. There's also a link to donate to our legal defense. So if you are able to, please consider throwing some support there as well. This is an attack, again, on all independent media, not just Breakthrough News. Brian Becker, really appreciate you coming on to put this all in context. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thank you.